Letters Across the Silence. Chapter 1. Duty and Ink. The morning sun found Miss Clara Harwood already restless. It was a February light, pale, undecided, filtering through the lace curtains of the small writing room that her mother insisted was so perfectly suitable for correspondence. The fire had burned low, the scent of beeswax and paper mingling in the chill. On the mahogany desk before her sat a clean sheet of vellum, an inkwell, and a letter from her brother Edward. Creased, travel-stained, and altogether too persuasive. Dearest Clara, I have a friend here, Captain Nathaniel Trevelyan. He is sensible, good-humoured, and has no family in England. If you could write to him now and then, it would do the fellow a world of good. I shall owe you more than I can ever repay. Clara had read it thrice already. The first reading produced incredulity, the second annoyance, the third resignation. "A soldier I have never met," she muttered, dipping her quill, "and I am to amuse him with observations about the weather." Her mother, gentle but firm in her notions of propriety, had merely smiled. "It will be a kindness, my dear. Men at war have few comforts." Clara sighed. Kindness was a virtue she could not refuse, though she sometimes found it inconvenient. So she began, writing neatly at first, then more freely. Harwood House, February 14th. My brother's friend, I am commanded, yes, commanded, to write and assure you that Edward is remembered fondly, and that our hens have taken to laying again after a most obstinate winter. I hope you are well, and that the Spanish mud is not so dreadful as Edward claims. Yours faithfully, C. Harwood. She sanded the paper, sealed it with crimson wax, and regarded the finished product with mixed pride and embarrassment. There, she told the hearth, a letter perfectly devoid of charm, that should end the matter. It did not. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Reply. 3 weeks later, as the first shy buds appeared along the hedgerows, a letter arrived addressed in a firm, unfamiliar hand. Clara broke the seal with polite curiosity, and within moments found herself smiling. Miss Harwood, I am grateful for the meteorological intelligence and the admirable hens. I regret I cannot offer such lively company here. Our own poultry consists chiefly of officers. The mud of Spain, I assure you, is all Edward claims and more. Still, your letter brought warmth to a damp camp. With respect, N. Trevelyan. Clara laughed aloud. Officers as poultry, how absurd. Yet the humour was unexpected and oddly appealing. That evening, she composed her answer more carefully than she intended. Captain Trevelyan, I am pleased my trivialities afforded amusement. Should you tire of beans and bullets, imagine instead the tranquillity of Harwood House, my mother's roses, my niece's shrill music lessons, and a dog who obeys no one but himself. The hens continue industriously virtuous. Yours, Clara Harwood. The use of her full name startled her once the ink had dried, but the mischief pleased her. When his next reply came, a lively account of a runaway mule and a sergeant who swore eternal vengeance, she knew she had found in Captain Trevelyan something far rarer than politeness, wit that matched her own. Their letters became a conversation written across distance. What began as a duty slipped, quietly, into delight. Chapter 3. A Friendship Written in Ink. By May, the rhythm of their correspondence had settled into a steady pulse, as natural as the turning of seasons. The postboy now brought not merely news, but expectation. Clara's pulse quickened each time she spied his red jacket through the trees. Her mother teased her, gently, about her epistolary devotion. Clara denied everything, of course, though her laughter betrayed her. Nathaniel's letters painted the war in curious hues, not heroic, not wholly grim. He wrote of the Spanish countryside, of villages that smelled of oranges and smoke, of men who joked in the face of danger, because to do otherwise was impossible. There are moments, he wrote, when the sky turns copper before a storm, and I remember England. its damp civility, its polite rain. I cannot say which I prefer. Clara replied with descriptions of home life, of the garden bursting into bloom, of the servants' endless gossip, of Edward's old horse now growing fat with peace. Your copper skies have their rival here, she wrote. Last evening's sunset turned the entire house to gold. Mamma said it was heaven's approval of my virtue, though I suspect it was only dust on the windows. Her letters lengthened, so did his. Between the jokes, something tender crept in, an intimacy that neither dared name. She began to sense the man behind the words, thoughtful, brave, occasionally melancholy. One night she caught herself rereading his latest letter by candlelight, tracing the indented lines with her fingertips. The house was silent. Beyond the window, rain fell softly on the roses. She realized she was smiling for no reason at all. Chapter 4. Shadows of War. The summer of 1812 brought heavy rain and darker news. Dispatches spoke of fierce engagements along the peninsula. When Nathaniel's next letter arrived, the tone had changed. Miss Harwood, forgive a short reply. We march tomorrow, and though I cannot tell you where, the road leads toward Thunder. Should you not hear from me soon, know that your letters have been a rare comfort. A man fights better when he remembers gentler things. Clara read those words 3 times, her throat tight. She sat very still, the letter trembling slightly in her hand. Then, with sudden resolve, she took up her pen. Captain Trevelyan, I will think of you each day until I hear again. Should thunder find you, remember that rain follows and flowers after that. England waits for her sons to return. Do not make me regret believing in your safe deliverance. She sealed it quickly, lest her courage falter. Weeks passed without answer. Each morning she listened for the clatter of the postboy's hooves, and each day he rode past without stopping. Her mother urged patience. Edward's silence was similar, perhaps all the mails delayed, but Clara's unease grew heavier than words could bear. In the quiet of evening she would sit by the window, looking toward the fields where the first wheat shimmered pale green, and whisper into the gathering dusk, Please God, let him be safe. At last, one late August afternoon, a letter arrived, the paper roughened by travel, the handwriting less steady. Miss Harwood, I was wounded at Badajoz. Nothing mortal, though the surgeons were uncertain for a time. They have left me with a scar that will alarm mirrors and perhaps small children. Forgive my silence. I have missed your letters more than I should confess. Ever your friend, Nathaniel Trevelyan. Clara pressed the page to her heart. Relief flooded through her so swiftly, she laughed and wept in the same breath. That evening she wrote by the fading light, My dear Captain, small children are more resilient than you imagine, and mirrors far less cruel. I thank heaven for your recovery. Were you here, I should scold you soundly for frightening us all, and then pour you tea. Yours ever, Clara. It was the first time she called him dear. She wondered if he would notice. She rather hoped he would. Chapter 5. The Weight of Waiting. Autumn laid a fine gold upon the hedgerows and a low mist upon the river. At Harwood House, the household slipped into its familiar rhythms. Linen aired on Thursdays, accounts tallied on Mondays, church on Sundays. But Clara moved through the days as if she were listening for a footfall that never came. Nathaniel's wounded letter had been followed by several cheerful notes from the convalescent barracks. Cheerful, that is, in the manner of a man who will not be the cause of anyone's worry. He wrote of the ilex trees outside his window, of a nurse with a stubborn fondness for broth, of the wonders of sleep unbroken by reveille. Clara answered each with warmth and gentle levity, slipping tenderness into the spaces between her sentences, as one might tuck lavender into a drawer. Then the post faltered again. Dispatches spoke of movements and remusterings. Names of cities she had never seen became the landscape of her imagined concern. Weeks lengthened. The letters ceased. Clara discovered the peculiar tyranny of hope, how it required daily tending, how it insisted that one listen always for a rider on the lane. She learned the precise creak of the front door, the postboy's cadence, the sound the letter knife made when parting wax from paper. She could not eat strawberries without remembering a phrase in one of his letters, "Your garden must be all sweetness now," and tasting instead the iron of fear. One evening she went down to the river alone. Willows leaned low over a surface smooth as pewter. She drew his last letter from her pocket and reread the crooked lines. "Nothing mortal," he had written, "ever your friend." The words had steadied her then. Now they ran like cool water over a stone worn thin by touch. "Very well," she whispered to the quiet. "I shall keep faith for the both of us, if I must." The following week she sent another letter into the silence, addressed to the regiment and augmented with 3 different directions provided by Edward's last scrawl. She wrote of the apple harvest and the parish school, of a quarrel between the cook and the housemaid over who had the better pie crust, of a robin that had built its nest upon the garden gate in flagrant defiance of traffic. She closed, after a long pause, with, "You are missed. By me." When an answer did not come, she sent no more, not from chillness, but from reverence. She sensed instinctively that a man who was fighting to return to himself might be crushed by the weight of expectation. So she folded her letters inward into prayer. Chapter 6. The Man Who Came Home. War ends like a curtain falling, abruptly, and leaving the audience blinking at ordinary light. News reached Harwood first as rumour, then as proclamation, then as the unmistakable sound of revelry in the village. The bells rang until they were hoarse. The vicar gave thanks. The publican promised ale enough to drown an army. A fortnight later, the carriage appeared on the Harwood lane, laurel tied to its lamps and mud on its wheels. Clara stood on the front steps beside her mother, the air cold and clean in her chest. Edward leapt from the carriage, sun-browned and jubilant, and promptly embraced them both with a vigour that restored every missing year in a moment. Clara laughed and found herself crying at the same time. Then another figure descended, taller, leaner, moving with a careful economy of motion, a soldier too used to rationing breath and strength. He wore plain black, travel-stained, with a hat that shadowed his face. He took it off as he approached, and the shadow lifted. The scar was not so terrible as he had warned, one fine, pale line that began at the temple and disappeared into the hair. It was his eyes that startled her, their thoughtful grey now darkened by something not quite sorrow, not quite fear, but allied to both. "Miss Harwood," he said, bowing, the voice she knew, cool iron wrapped in velvet. "I am grateful to make your acquaintance at last." Clara managed a curtsy that felt somehow like a vow resisted. "Captain Trevelyan." "I believe I am already acquainted with your handwriting." The faintest shift, was it amusement, touched his mouth. "A poor substitute for myself, I assure you." Edward clapped Nathaniel's shoulder. "Come in, you two. There are pies and a mother's hospitality. It is a wonder to which all veterans must submit." Inside there were introductions, laughter, the almost violent comfort of family. Nathaniel bore it with polite fortitude, warming by degrees. He ate little, praised much, fielded Edward's stories with a tactful brevity that suggested he could have corrected them, but would not. When Clara tried to slip their letters into the conversation, "Do you recall that mule you wrote of?" He nodded, smiled, and let the subject pass as a skater might avoid a crack in the ice. Later, after the house had yawned itself toward bedtime, Clara paused at the threshold of the drawing room. Nathaniel stood alone by the uncurtained window, hands clasped behind his back, gazing into the black garden as though it were a map he had not learned to read. "I hope the room is comfortable," she said. He turned. The lamplight made a gentler man of him. "It is more than comfortable. It is peace." He seemed on the brink of adding something, but whatever it was retracted like a shy animal. "Thank you," he finished softly. She wanted to ask then, did my letters matter? But the question felt inexplicably like trespass. So she said only, "Good night," and carried her unslept questions upstairs. Chapter 7. The Stranger Beneath Familiar Words. In the days that followed, Nathaniel proved himself agreeable, useful, and maddeningly absent, all without leaving the room. He rose early and walked the estate with Edward, observing the tenant cottages and the north field with a practical eye. He read aloud to Mrs. Harwood when her headaches pressed. He repaired a hinge on the dovecote and earned the undying adoration of 2 small nieces by teaching them to whistle through acorns. He was a man easy to admire and hard to approach. There were moments when the old Nathaniel, hers, the one of ink and wry confidences, glimmered through. When Edward bemoaned the state of English coffee, Nathaniel replied, "It can be improved, but only by the absence of coffee." And Clara heard the familiar cadence and wanted to weep with relief. But then, as though startled by his own ease, he stepped back into quiet. At dinner, conversation flowed over and around him. He answered when addressed, offered a few dry observations, and declined to speak of the wars with a graceful finality no one wished to challenge. When Clara mentioned a line from one of his letters, "You said the sky tasted of brass once," he smiled in acknowledgement and changed the subject to the roses. That night, the house shook with a storm that seemed to arrive from every direction at once. Rain battered the windows. Wind combed the yews with iron teeth. Clara, sleepless, rose to secure a latch and, passing the guest corridor, heard a sound she did not at first recognize, the rasp of a man wrestling for air. She knocked softly. No answer. She opened the door. Nathaniel was on the floor beside the bed, braced on one arm, the other hand reaching for nothing and catching only the dark. His face was slick with sweat. His eyes were open and not seeing. The thunder's flash sketched every angle of him in cruel white. "Nathaniel," she said, gently, as one speaks to a frightened horse. She dropped to her knees, the carpet soaking her gown. "Nathaniel, it is Clara. You are at Harwood. You are safe." He gasped as though dragged up from deep water and focused by degrees upon her face. Embarrassment, fury, and bone-deep exhaustion moved across his features like weather. He pressed a shaking hand to his eyes. "I beg your pardon," he said hoarsely. "This is unsoldierly." She could not help it. She reached for him. He flinched, then stilled, the tremor in his shoulders subsiding as if her palm were the steady edge of the world. "I do not think courage looks only like banners," she said. "Sometimes it looks like breathing." He let out something between a laugh and a sob. "Miss Harwood, Clara, do not be kind to me. I cannot endure it." "Then endure me," she whispered, the audacity of it sparking in her blood. "I am not kind." "I am concerned." For a moment, they knelt like penitents on the same thin strip of carpet, thunder rolling past them in slow drums. At last he drew himself upright, and she stood with him, relinquishing his hand only when she must. "You should not have come," he said, not ungratefully. "I know," she replied. "I did." She closed the door behind her and leaned against the cool panelling in the corridor, her breath shaky, her heart astonished by its own certainty. By morning, he was the model of composure again. Only the new hollowness under his eyes and the care with which he teased the children into laughter at breakfast betrayed the night. He thanked her, formally, in the presence of the family, for fetching the housemaid during the storm, for seeing to the fire. She accepted the lie for what it was, a gentleman's shield. But when she left the room, she saw, tucked at the edge of her plate where no one else would notice, a folded scrap of paper in his square hand. "You were right. Breathing can be work. Thank you for sharing it." She folded the scrap without showing her smile to anyone. Chapter 8. breaking through the quiet. It was Clara who began again. If letters had once formed their bridge, conversation would be the new span, built soberly, plank by careful plank. She found him in the library one afternoon, the rain sighing against the windows in a more forgiving mood than the night before. "You evade as expertly as you fence," she said, selecting a book from the shelf without looking at it. "It is a skill, to be sure. But I have matching expertise in pursuit." He glanced up from the atlas he was not reading. "I thought your expertise lay in the governance of hens." "An empire," she agreed gravely, "vast and rebellious. Still, I have leisure for minor campaigns. Shall we play at chess?" They sat opposite one another before the fire. The board between them felt like a courteous battlefield, its rules clear and its losses bloodless. She opened with the queen's pawn. He countered in silence, eyeing her across the carved ramparts. She took a knight. He trapped her bishop. She sacrificed more than was prudent to preserve a line that looked to him like folly. "When the worst has already happened," she observed, nudging a rook into harm's way, "one becomes bold." He looked at the board, then at her. Or reckless. "Boldness only pretends to recklessness," she said. "It is a disguise that convinces enemies and bystanders and sometimes oneself. It is useful." "Ah," his mouth tilted, "a philosophy of rooks and women." "Rooks and women and men," she said softly. "And letters." The word hung between them. He watched it, then chose to let it live. "I reread them," he said at last, "on the ship home." Heat moved like a blush through her, though the fire scarcely warmed the room. "And did they offend you?" "They offended despair," he said. "I found I did not mind the offence." The next day, she brought a book of verse to the garden and read aloud while he pruned the roses with more care than the thorns deserved. She chose lines about winter yielding to spring, about patience that was not acquiescence, about love that refused to announce itself as such. He listened without looking at her. When she closed the book, he said, "Your voice makes even the poor lines sound wise." "You are generous," she replied. "Edward says I turn sermonish when given a text." Edward has never heard a sermon he did not think improved by ale. She laughed. The sound, returning to her from the faded brick wall, did not sound like a stranger's anymore. So they walked and read, and sometimes, carefully, as if lifting a teacup filled to the lip, spoke of nights when the mind refused sleep. He did not describe. She did not ask. He said only, "There are echoes," and she said, "Then we must fill the house with kinder sounds." One late afternoon, while clouds went mauve and the starlings gathered in a dark ribbon, she found him repairing the gate where the robin still presided over her second brood. He had smoothed the splintered wood and strengthened the hinge, not because the gate was much used, but because it was there, and mending it felt like persuading the world back into order. "I have something for you," Clara said. She held out a small parcel wrapped in plain paper and tied with blue silk. His name was on it in her even hand. He did not take it at once. "What is it?" "Evidence," she said, "for the prosecution of your doubts." He smiled without mirth. "I fear the defense will call no witnesses." "Then it is fortunate the prosecution has a strong case." She placed the parcel on the gatepost and stepped back. "I shall be in the library, or the hen empire, or both." He untied the blue ribbon only after she had gone. Inside lay his letters, stacked in the order of their arrival, worn at the creases, faintly perfumed by the drawer in which she had kept them. Her notes were not there. She had not presumed to make him carry her voice. But on the topmost page she had written a single sentence. "If you cannot remember the man you were, read what he wrote." He stood very still. A robin landed on the post and regarded him as if deciding whether he would be allowed to pass. He placed one finger beside the bird's tiny foot, as if to swear an oath neither of them would understand and both would honour. Then he carried the bundle inside to whatever place in the house felt most like his own. That evening he did not come down to dinner. Edward, affronted on behalf of the beef, went up with a plate and returned with it untouched, and his affront gentled into concern. Clara ate little and said less. She slept not at all. In the morning she went again to the garden to find him already there, the letters returned to their silk ribbon, and the ribbon looped around his fingers like a vow. He looked older and younger at once, older in the eyes, younger in the way his shoulders had dropped from around his ears. "I know this man," he said without preamble, lifting the bundle. "I had mislaid him." She let out the breath she had not known she held. "Then we shall pin his direction to the map and send him regular provisions." His laugh was soft and incredulous. "Provisions, Miss Harwood." "Tea," she said gravely, "and company." "And stubbornness, which is our county's chief crop." He glanced at the ribbon again. "Clara," he said, tasting the name as if sipping something he had not allowed himself in too long, "I am not good company. I rise at wrong hours. I forget to speak. I am not—" He gestured, as though the word whole were a moth he could not catch. She considered him, his careful stance, the stubborn dignity that had survived even the worst. "Do you know," she said, "how a graft takes on a rose? One cuts a clean slant, binds it tight to good stock, and waits. The waiting requires faith. But in time the sap accepts the stranger, and the wound becomes the place of blooming." His gaze flicked to the roses. "Do you propose to garden me?" "Relentlessly." He bowed his head, not in concession, but in acknowledgement of a thing too solemn for jest. "Then I shall do my best to grow." Chapter 9. The Night of Storms. Winter came early that year. The air sharpened, and the fields turned the colour of pewter beneath a heavy sky. Harwood House drew closer around its hearths. Candles burned longer, voices dropped lower. For weeks after the return of his letters, Nathaniel seemed transformed, lighter, though still careful. He accompanied Clara on walks, helped Edward with estate accounts, and even teased the children with half-remembered riddles from the campaign. Yet sometimes, when conversation faltered, his eyes would drift elsewhere, towards something unseen, but not absent. One December evening the sky broke open. Rain lashed the windows. Wind pressed the old panes like a fist. Clara, half asleep, was startled by a dull crash from the corridor, then silence, followed by a low guttural sound that froze her blood. She seized a candle and hurried down the passage. Nathaniel's door stood ajar. Inside, the fire had guttered. He was on his knees beside the hearth, shaking, his gaze locked on flames that were no longer there. "Hold the line," he whispered to ghosts only he could see. Clara set the candle down and went to him. "Nathaniel," she said softly, "it's over. You're home. You're safe." He flinched, then looked up, his breath ragged. Recognition dawned slowly, bringing with it shame. "Forgive me. I thought—" He broke off, pressing both hands to his temples. "You should not see me thus." "Then who should?" she asked. "Who better than the one who already knows your words by heart?" He gave a raw, involuntary laugh that turned to something perilously close to tears. "I cannot bear pity." "Then bear love instead," she said simply. "It asks nothing. It only stays." The storm raged, neither moved. At last he whispered, "You shame my despair." "No," she said, "I share it." "That is different." When the thunder subsided, he had fallen asleep where he knelt, his head resting against the sofa. She covered him with a blanket and left the candle burning low, its small, steady flame the only witness to the truce between them. Chapter X. The Garden of Confessions. The morning dawned rinsed and tender, as though the world itself sought forgiveness. Clara found him in the rose garden, pruning knife idle in his hand, the air fragrant with wet earth. He did not turn as she approached. "You should not have come last night. I could no more have stayed away than the tide can refuse the moon." He gave a short breath of disbelief. "Do you think me a man of poetry still? The letters deceived you. I was younger then, less broken, more vain." "They revealed you," she said. "You are still that man. You only doubt the proof." He faced her then, every line of him taut. "You do not know what you offer." "My sleep, my thoughts, sometimes I cannot tell the day from the remembering of it." "Then let me be your daylight," she said. "I do not fear your darkness." The pruning knife slipped from his hand, forgotten. For a long moment they stood within the scent of roses, the sky above them pale with the promise of snow. "Clara," he said at last, voice breaking on her name, "I do not know how to begin again." "Begin here," she murmured, and took his scarred hand in hers. Chapter 11. Letters Remembered. By January, the house settled into a rhythm of recovery that felt almost domestic. Nathaniel began walking daily with Edward, speaking to the tenants, even laughing, truly laughing, at the antics of the children. Yet the greatest change was quiet and unseen, a softening in how he looked at Clara, as though each glance were a rediscovery of grace. One afternoon she found him in the library, fire crackling, her blue ribbon bundle beside him. He rose as she entered. "I have been reading my own life," he said. "Your faith in me shames every doubt I ever held." "It was not faith," she answered, smiling, "only stubborn affection." He opened one letter, the very first, and read aloud, voice rough but steady. "The hens have taken to laying again after a most obstinate winter." He laughed softly. "So it began. And so it ends," she said, "for that obstinate winter is over." He reached for her hand across the small distance between them. "Then may I ask one thing more, to ensure it never returns?" "Anything," she whispered. "Stay." Chapter 12. Across the Silence. Spring returned like a benediction. The orchard shimmered with blossom. The river, once grey, ran clear. Nathaniel moved through the house as though each step reclaimed a fragment of himself. One morning he met Clara by the fountain in the rose garden. The air smelled of lilac and damp stone. In his hand was a letter, folded and sealed. "This," he said, offering it, "is the last I shall ever write to you." She broke the seal. Inside, in the familiar, confident script, "You once wrote that some wounds teach us tenderness. I am learning. Will you marry me?" She looked up, eyes bright with tears and laughter. "You already have your answer." It was written long ago between the lines of every letter. He took her hands, drawing her near. "Then let the silence say the rest." And in that still moment, the garden golden, the birds just beginning their song, the silence spoke what neither ink nor distance could ever contain. The end. If you've enjoyed this story of love, redemption, and quiet courage, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you'll be the first to hear our next Regency romance on the Regency Gazette channel. Thank you for listening.